You ever have one of those moments where your life splits in two? Like there's the before, where everything seems normal, not perfect, but normal, and the after, where nothing makes sense anymore. I had mine on a Tuesday afternoon. Not even a dramatic day like an anniversary or a holiday. Just a Tuesday. I remember because I was driving back from picking up some extra sandpaper at Home Depot for a project in the garage. And then my phone buzzed. It was a text from an old coworker I hadn't heard from in years, Mark. We worked together back when I was still at that marketing agency, before I switched to remote contracting. Mark was one of those guys you grab beers with after work, talk about fantasy football and which of the execs were sleeping with their assistants. He wasn't someone I expected to hear from, especially out of the blue like that. The message just said, "Hey man, not sure if you know this, but I came across something you might want to see." There was a link attached, some article from a business site. At first I thought it was spam or one of those prank things, but I was bored sitting at a red light, so I clicked it. It was an interview, some puff piece on a guy named Andrew Lockwood, CEO of a big logistics company. The name sounded vaguely familiar, but it didn't click right away. The article was mostly corporate fluff, the usual. Visionary leader who grew the company by 300%, kind of stuff. But halfway down, there was a photo, Andrew shaking hands with a group of employees at some charity gala. And right there, standing beside him, was my wife. Not just standing there, smiling, her hand on his arm like they were old friends. Or more than friends. At first I figured, okay, maybe it's just one of those weird coincidences. My wife, Amanda, worked in event planning years ago. She coordinated fundraisers, corporate retreats, that kind of thing. Maybe this was some old event she worked on. No big deal, right? But my stomach wouldn't let it go. Because there was something in her smile, not the polite, professional one she gave clients, but the smile she used to give me back when we were first dating. Like she was comfortable with him, like she knew him. Really knew him. I spent the rest of the drive home in a fog. The whole house felt different when I walked in, like I'd stepped into a place I used to know but couldn't quite recognize anymore. Amanda was in the kitchen, folding towels on the counter, humming to herself. Totally normal. Totally oblivious to the storm brewing in my head. I didn't say anything that night. Or the next. I don't know why. Maybe because part of me didn't want to believe it. Maybe because once you open that door, you can't close it again. But I couldn't let it go. I started digging, pulling up old emails, Facebook posts, anything I could find. And the more I looked, the more I found little things that didn't add up. Trips she took, for work, that lined up with conferences his company hosted. A necklace I remember asking about once, she said it was a gift from a client, that I found a picture of online, hanging around her neck at a private dinner with Andrew Lockwood and a few other execs. I was uncovering a trail, one breadcrumb at a time, and every step I took felt like I was walking further away from the life I thought I knew. The kicker? This wasn't some recent fling. This was old. Buried. Hidden so deep it had almost fossilized. We were talking more than a decade ago, back when our daughter was still in preschool. It had been covered up so well I might never have known, if it hadn't been for Mark's random text. That's what got me the most at first. Not even the cheating, I mean, that was bad enough, but the fact that she had lived with it. Sat beside me at dinner, held my hand at our daughter's soccer games, planned vacations, smiled in family photos, all while knowing there was this secret living inside her. A whole other life I was never meant to see. And I could have stayed in the dark forever. But once you see the first crack, you can't unsee the rest. And this was just the first crack. At a scab, you don't really want to make it worse, but you also can't leave it alone. That's where I was. Sitting in my office at home, staring at my laptop, wondering how deep this rabbit hole went. I started with her old emails. I still had access to our shared account from back when we first bought the house, you know, the one we used for bills and stuff. Most of it was boring. Target coupons. PDA reminders. A whole folder full of recipes she never actually made. But then I found an archived folder, buried under a few layers of subfolders with names like Old Work and Event Files. Almost missed it. Inside, there were only 3 emails. All from the same address. That was my first gut punch, seeing his name, right there in my house, in my life. The emails weren't scandalous on the surface. They were polite, professional. Just enough plausible deniability. Thanks again for your help with the gala. Looking forward to collaborating again. That kind of thing. But it was the timestamps that set me off. The first email was dated June 18, 2013. I remember that week clear as day because I was supposed to go on a fishing trip with my brother, but Amanda came down with some nasty stomach bug. I stayed home to take care of her and our daughter, running to the store for ginger ale and saltines. The whole time, I thought I was being the good husband. Turns out, that was the same week she had her first business dinner with Andrew Lockwood. The second email was 3 months later, right after our 10th anniversary. We'd taken a weekend trip to the mountains. We fought a little because she was distracted, kept checking her phone, said it was work stuff. I let it slide. Married long enough, you learn to pick your battles. But now, reading the email, I knew exactly who she was texting that weekend. The third email was the worst. No dates, no formalities. Just one line. It's better if we don't email anymore. That was it. No signature, no subject. I sat there staring at that sentence for a long time. Long enough for the sun to go down and the screen to start reflecting my face back at me. And what I saw wasn't just a man who'd been lied to. It was a man who'd built his whole life on something that wasn't real. I don't even remember going to bed that night. I must have, because I woke up there the next morning, Amanda curled up beside me like nothing had changed. But in my head, everything was different. I wasn't ready to confront her yet. I needed more, not just for some dramatic showdown, but for me. I needed to understand how deep it went. How much of my life was real and how much was smoke and mirrors. So I kept digging. There's a weird thing that happens when you go back through old photos. At first, you're just looking for clues. Who was she standing next to at that wedding? Why was she smiling like that at her phone in the background of that beach picture? But after a while, the photos stop being memories. They become evidence. I found a photo from a corporate retreat Amanda helped plan in 2014. It was taken at some fancy resort, the kind with infinity pools and golf carts to ferry you around. There were about 20 people in the shot, all employees and event staff. And off to the side, half out of frame, was Andrew Lockwood. They weren't touching. They weren't even standing close. But there was something in the way they weren't looking at each other, like two people who knew they couldn't be obvious, but also couldn't help themselves. That's when it really hit me. This wasn't a one-night thing. This was a relationship. And here's the kicker, it wasn't even some fiery, passionate love affair. It was quieter than that. Slower. The kind of thing that sneaks up on you until one day, you realize you've crossed a line you can't uncross. The worst part? By the time I found out, it was ancient history. Buried under soccer games, family vacations, mortgage payments, and parent-teacher conferences. Amanda had done such a good job sealing it off that even she seemed to have forgotten about it. But now that I knew, I couldn't forget. And if I was gonna confront her, I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I reached out to Andrew Lockwood. I didn't message him right away. It took me a couple of days to work up to it, and even then, I almost backed out about 100 times. What do you even say to the guy who slept with your wife and then went on with his life like it was nothing? Hey man, just wondering if you remember ruining my marriage? Yeah, not exactly Hallmark material. I ended up keeping it simple. Sent him a LinkedIn message, of all things, because that was the only contact I could find that wouldn't immediately scream psycho husband. Hi Andrew, not sure if you remember me. My wife, Amanda, worked on some events for your company years back. I'd love to ask you a couple of questions about that time, if you have a moment. I figured either he'd ignore it, or I'd get some corporate brush off. But to my surprise, he replied within the hour. Of course, happy to help. Feel free to call. He included his number, like we were old pals reconnecting at a reunion. I stared at that message for a long time, my thumb hovering over the call button. It felt weirdly intimate, holding that tiny piece of him in my hand. This man who had been part of my wife's life, my life, without me ever knowing. I called him the next morning, when Amanda was out running errands. Andrew speaking, he answered, smooth and professional, like I was a potential client or investor. Hi, Andrew. This is... I swallowed the lump in my throat. This is Amanda's husband. Or I guess her current husband. There was a long pause on the other end. Not silence. I could hear him breathing, shifting a little in his chair, but he didn't say anything. I know about you and her, I said, keeping my voice even. I just want to understand what happened. Another pause. Then a sigh, the kind of sound a man makes when he knows the past just caught up to him. Look, he said quietly. That was a long time ago. Not to me, I said. To me, it's right now. That shut him up for a second. Then, to my surprise, he actually started talking. He met Amanda at a charity gala, the same one in that article Mark sent me. She was handling logistics, making sure the donors had enough wine, that kind of thing. Andrew noticed her right away, but it wasn't some sleazy pickup scenario. He said, and I'll never forget this. She had this calm about her. Like nothing rattled her. I almost laughed. That was Amanda all right, steady, unshakable, the anchor in every storm. Except, apparently, her own. They worked together on a couple more events, and somewhere along the way, the lines blurred. It started with late-night planning calls, then inside jokes, then drinks after meetings. Nothing physical for months, he swore. Just emotional. Was it love? I asked him. He hesitated. I don't know if I'd call it that. It was easy. Easy. Like sliding on ice, effortless until you're flat on your ass. He admitted they slept together, once, maybe twice. I had my doubts about the maybe. Said they ended it before it got serious, before anyone could find out. Amanda cut ties completely after that last email I found, and he respected that. I never wanted to hurt her family, he said. Or you. I sat there holding the phone, trying to process what I just heard. This wasn't some grand, passionate affair. It was a slow drift, two people leaning on each other at the wrong time in their lives. It wasn't dramatic, it was ordinary. That almost made it worse. You ever think about it after? I asked. Sometimes, he admitted. But it was a long time ago. There it was again, the past tense. For him, it was ancient history. For me, it was right now. I hung up not long after that. Thanked him for his honesty, even though I wasn't sure how honest he'd actually been. But it gave me enough. Enough to see the shape of what had happened, even if I didn't know every detail. But knowing wasn't the same as understanding. And it sure as hell wasn't the same as forgiving. Now came the hard part, facing Amanda. There's this moment right before you confront someone you love, when you're standing at the edge of everything you've built together, and you realize, no matter what they say, there's no going back. Even if you work through it. Even if they apologize. Even if you forgive. That moment becomes a permanent crack in the foundation. And no matter how much you patch it up, you'll always know it's there. That's where I was. I spent the whole day pacing the house like a caged animal, waiting for Amanda to come home. Every creak of the front door, every car pulling into the driveway made my heart jump. I wasn't scared of her, I was scared of the truth. The version of her I was about to meet. The version that had been hiding from me for over a decade. She got home around 5:30, bags of groceries hanging off her arms, talking to our daughter on speakerphone about some group project for school. I stood in the hallway, just watching her, the woman I married, the woman who made me coffee every morning, the woman who carried our child, and for a split second, I almost chickened out. But that crack in the foundation was already there. Ignoring it wouldn't seal it up. Amanda, I said, my voice quieter than I expected. We need to talk. She glanced up, smile fading the second she saw my face. There's this look married people get when something's wrong, a flicker of panic mixed with resignation. Because when you've been together long enough, you know the difference between can you grab milk on the way home? And we need to talk. She hung up with our daughter without another word, set the bags down on the counter, and wiped her hands on her jeans. Okay, she said, cautious but calm. What's going on? I didn't ease into it. I couldn't. I was too far past gentle. I know about you and Andrew Lockwood. Her face didn't change right away. No gasping, no dramatic denial. Just a brief flicker, like a door closing behind her eyes. Her back straightened a little, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. What do you mean? She asked, her voice too measured. I know you were with him, I said. Back when you were doing events for his company. I know you slept with him. She exhaled, like someone letting go of a weight they'd been holding for too long. She didn't argue. Didn't deny it. Just leaned back against the counter, eyes fixed on the floor. How long have you known? She asked, almost too quietly. A few days, I said. But I think I've known, in some way, for a lot longer. She nodded, just once. Like she'd been bracing for this moment for years. And maybe she had. Maybe every anniversary dinner, every Christmas morning, every time I reached for her hand, a little part of her had been waiting for the past to knock on the door. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I never wanted you to find out. I felt something snap inside me at that, like an old rope fraying down to its final thread. That's not the part that hurts, Amanda. It's that you hid it. For years. You let me love you like nothing happened. You let me trust you. Tears welled in her eyes, but I wasn't ready for them. Not yet. I needed her to talk. To explain. Was it love? I asked, echoing the question I'd asked Andrew. She shook her head so fast her hair swung. No. God, no. It wasn't anything like that. Then what was it? My voice was rising, my hands curling into fists at my sides. You risked everything for what? A fling with your boss? Her lip trembled. It wasn't a fling. It wasn't planned. It just happened. I let out a bitter laugh. That's what everyone says, isn't it? Like he tripped and fell into his bed. She flinched, but I couldn't stop. Do you know how it feels to look back at your whole marriage and wonder what was real? Every time you kissed me, every time you said you loved me, was it all just guilt? No, she said, her voice breaking. No, it wasn't. I love you. I never stopped loving you. Except for when you were loving him. I shot back. That one landed hard. She covered her face with both hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. And I stood there, torn between the man who wanted to comfort his crying wife and the man who wanted to break something, or someone. I ended it, she said through her hands. It was barely anything, but I ended it because I knew if I didn't I would lose you. And I couldn't lose you. I should have felt something when she said that. Relief, maybe. Or comfort. But all I felt was empty. You already did, I said quietly. Her hands dropped, eyes wide with fear. Please, she whispered. Please don't say that. I didn't answer. Because I didn't know if it was true. I'd found the truth I was looking for, but all it left me with was more questions. What do you do when the person you trust most becomes the person you can't believe? When the home you built together becomes a crime scene? When the love you thought was unbreakable turns out to be just paper thin? I didn't know. Not yet. But I knew this wasn't over. Not even close. We didn't eat dinner that night. We barely even moved. Amanda sat at the kitchen table, staring at her hands like they belonged to someone else. I stood by the window, looking out at our backyard, the place where we'd hosted birthday parties, barbecues, even a couple of our friends' weddings. It was just grass and trees now. None of it felt real. Every so often, she'd start to say something, then stop herself. I think we both knew there wasn't a speech or apology big enough to fix what had cracked open between us. But eventually, I couldn't take the silence anymore. Why? I asked, my voice low. Why him? Why then? She didn't answer right away. Her fingers traced patterns on the table, like she was trying to write out the words before saying them. I was lonely, she said finally. You were working so much, and I was home with Emma all the time. I felt invisible. Like I was just there. That hit me harder than I expected. Not because I hadn't heard it before. Plenty of married couples go through that phase where you're more like roommates than partners. But because I didn't know she felt that way then. I thought we were good. Not perfect, but good. Why didn't you say something? I asked. Why didn't you talk to me? Her eyes filled with tears. I didn't know how. And then Andrew, he noticed me. Paid attention to me. And I liked how it felt. It was so damn cliché I wanted to scream. But what made it worse was that I understood it. Not the cheating, never the cheating, but the craving to be seen. To feel like more than just someone's wife or someone's husband. I'd felt it too at times. The difference was, I never acted on it. Was it just sex? I asked. I needed to know. Not because it would make it better, but because it would make it clearer. No, she said quietly. It was never about the sex. That almost made me laugh, not because it was funny, but because it was so much worse. Sex is simple. Physical. A mistake you could maybe chalk up to bad judgment, or too much wine. But emotional? Emotional meant connection. And that meant there was a part of her, a part that was supposed to be mine, that she'd given to him instead. Do you love me? I asked. My voice cracked on the last word. She stood up so fast her chair scraped against the tile. Of course I love you, she said, her voice shaking. I never stopped. Even when I was at my worst, I loved you. It should have felt good to hear. It didn't. Love didn't stop her from lying to me. Love didn't stop her from making me the fool in my own life. How could you live with it? I asked. All these years, how could you sit across from me at dinner, sleep beside me, knowing what you did? Her face crumpled. Because I convinced myself it didn't matter, she said. It was so short, so stupid, and I told myself if I buried it deep enough, it would just disappear. I wanted to forget it so badly. I thought maybe if I never said it out loud, it would be like it never happened. I shook my head, the anger bubbling back up. That's not how it works, Amanda. It happened. And you made me live a lie without even knowing it. She wiped her face with the sleeve of her sweatshirt, her breath hitching in her chest. I know. I know. And I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, I don't even know how to say it. I didn't have anything to say to that. Because what do you even do with an apology for something like this? There's no manual for when your wife cheats, lies about it for a decade, and then looks at you like you're the only thing keeping her upright. I need space, I said finally. Her face went pale. Are you leaving? No, I said. Not yet. But I can't sit here with you right now. She nodded like she understood, but I could see the terror behind her eyes, the fear that this was the beginning of the end. And maybe it was. I didn't know yet. I grabbed my keys, my jacket, and walked out the front door without looking back. The air was cold, the sky already dark. I got in my truck and just drove. No destination, no plan. Just me, the road, and the sound of my own breathing. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. My chest felt tight, like something inside was trying to claw its way out. I pulled into an empty parking lot behind a strip mall and just sat there, staring at the dashboard. And for the first time since I found out, I let myself feel all of it, the hurt, the rage, the humiliation, the heartbreak. It came out in this broken, ugly sound I didn't even recognize as my own voice. I wasn't just mourning the affair. I was mourning the man I thought I was, the husband, the father, the guy who had a happy marriage and a wife he could trust. That guy was gone. And I had no idea who was left, I don't know how long I sat in that parking lot. Could have been an hour. Could have been half the night. Time gets weird when your whole life's been flipped upside down. All I know is, at some point, my phone buzzed. Amanda. I didn't answer. Couldn't. Not yet. When I finally drove home, the house was dark except for the lamp in the living room. Amanda was curled up on the couch, knees pulled to her chest, eyes puffy and red from crying. She looked up when I walked in, but she didn't say anything. Neither did I. I just stood there in the doorway, looking at her, really looking at her, and wondering how many times I'd seen this woman, the woman I married, and not known who I was really looking at. Because now, everything felt like a question mark. Every memory, every smile, every "I love you." Which ones were real? Which ones were covering something up? I sat down across the room, not next to her. Not yet. The silence between us was heavy, like there was a third person in the room, the ghost of who we used to be. Are you gonna leave me? She asked quietly, her voice hoarse from crying. I didn't have an answer for that. Not because I didn't care, but because I didn't know. When you get married, you make all these promises, in sickness and health, for better or worse. But no one ever stands up there and says, what if you break my heart and lie to my face for 10 years, what then? There's no vow for that. I don't know, I said, because it was the only honest thing I had left. She wiped her nose on her sleeve, a habit I'd always teased her about. It was so normal, so Amanda, and for a split second, I hated her a little less. But then the weight of everything came crashing down again. I need you to tell me everything, I said. No more half-truths, no more protecting me, no more lies. I need to know the whole story. She nodded slowly, like she'd been waiting for this. Maybe she even wanted it, to finally scrape all the rot out of the cracks and see if there was anything left underneath. She started from the beginning, the gala, the late-night planning calls, the first drink, the first touch. The first time she crossed a line in her head, even before anything physical happened. She said it was like walking into fog. She didn't even realize how far she'd gone until she couldn't see the way back. It wasn't some whirlwind affair. It was slower than that. Colder. More like a leak that slowly filled up her life until it was drowning her. She swore they only slept together twice. I didn't know if I believed her, but I wanted to. God help me, I wanted to. I asked her if she loved him. She said no again. He was just there, she said. And I was weak. Weak. I hated that word. Because Amanda wasn't weak. She was the one who held everything together, the bills, the schedules, the little details of our life. And yet, somehow, the strongest person I knew was also the one who betrayed me. Did you ever think about telling me? I asked. She shook her head. I was too scared. Once it was over, I convinced myself telling you would only hurt you. And I wanted to protect us. Protect us? I laughed bitterly. Amanda, you didn't protect us. You protected yourself. You took my choice away. You decided for me. Her face crumpled, but I didn't care. I wasn't trying to hurt her. I was trying to make her understand. There's a difference between healing and hiding. She didn't heal anything, she just shoved it into a dark corner and hoped it would die there. It didn't. It grew. And now here we were, living with the monster she thought she buried. Do you still love me? She asked, her voice small. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to grab her, hold her, tell her we'd figure it out. But all I could say was, I don't know. Because how do you love someone when you don't even know who they are anymore? That night, I slept in the guest room. Or at least I tried to. I stared at the ceiling, listening to every creak in the house, every shift of the wind outside. Everything felt haunted, like I was living inside someone else's life. At some point, I realized, Amanda wasn't the only ghost here. I was haunting this house too. The version of me who believed in her, who believed in us, was gone. And the man left behind wasn't sure what came next. But I knew one thing for sure. We couldn't go back. The only way out was through. The next morning, The house was so quiet it felt like a funeral. Even the coffee pot sounded too loud, hissing and sputtering as it filled the carafe. Amanda wasn't in the kitchen when I walked in, which was unusual. Mornings were her thing. She liked her routines, her quiet cup of coffee before the world woke up. But that day, her mug sat empty in the sink, and her keys were gone. She left me a note on the counter. Went for a walk. Needed some air. Please don't leave before I get back. I stared at it for a while, turning the words over in my head. Please don't leave. As if leaving was something you could decide in a single morning. Truth was, I didn't know if I was staying or going. That choice was too big to make over burnt coffee and stale silence. Instead, I sat at the table and thought about all the pieces that made up our marriage. The good ones, vacations where we laughed until we couldn't breathe, late-night drives with the windows down, her head on my shoulder while our daughter slept in the back seat. And then the pieces I never saw until now, the quiet loneliness, the nights she lay awake beside me, feeling invisible. The cracks that had been there for years, waiting for the right pressure to break them wide open. It's funny, when you say, for better or worse. At the altar, you don't actually picture the worse. You think about financial struggles, maybe a health scare. You don't imagine sitting at your kitchen table wondering how much of your life was a lie. When Amanda got back, her hair was damp with sweat, her face pale and drawn. She looked thinner than she had the day before, like carrying all those secrets had been keeping her upright, and now they were gone, she was collapsing in on herself. I thought maybe you'd be gone, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm still here, I said. And it was the truth, for now. She sat across from me, wrapping her hands around her empty coffee mug like it was some kind of anchor. I know I can't fix this overnight, she said. I know you might never forgive me. I didn't answer. Not because I wanted to punish her, but because I didn't know what forgiveness even meant in a situation like this. Forgiveness isn't a switch you flip. It's a slow grind, a choice you have to make over and over, even on the days you don't want to. I need to ask you something, I said, my voice rough from sleep and too many unsaid things. When you were with him, were you thinking about me? Were you thinking about Emma? Her eyes filled up again, and I could see how much she wanted to lie. To protect me, maybe even to protect herself. But she didn't. No, she whispered. In those moments, I wasn't thinking about anything except not feeling invisible. That hurt more than if she'd said she was in love with him. Because love can be fought for. But being invisible? How do you fight against something you didn't even know was there? We sat in silence after that, both of us too tired to fight, too scared to hope. And for the first time, I realized, this wasn't just about Amanda's affair. It was about all the tiny choices we both made over the years. The times I stayed late at work. The nights we fell asleep with our backs to each other. The conversations we didn't have because they felt too hard, or too awkward, or because we assumed there'd always be more time. I wasn't excusing what she did. Not even close. But I was starting to see the shape of the thing that led us here. And it wasn't one big explosion, it was erosion. Slow, quiet, relentless. What do we do now? She asked, her voice small. I don't know, I said. But I'm not ready to make any decisions yet. She nodded, her hands trembling around the mug. I want to fight for us, she said. If you'll let me. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that love, real love, could survive this. But the truth was, I didn't know if I still believed in love at all. Let's take it one day at a time, I said, and that was the most I could offer. She reached across the table, her fingers hovering near mine, but not touching. I didn't move my hand away, but I didn't close the distance either. One day at a time. That's all we had. The weirdest part of living with a betrayal like this is how normal everything else keeps going. You think the world should stop, like the sky should turn some different color, or the clocks should freeze in place. But the bills still show up. The laundry still needs doing. You still have to figure out what's for dinner. The morning after Amanda came clean, We went through the motions like we were play acting at being married. I made coffee. She asked if I wanted eggs. I shook my head. It was all so painfully normal, and it felt like an insult to how shattered I felt inside. We didn't talk much that day. Not because there was nothing to say, but because there was too much. Every conversation felt like a landmine, and we were both too exhausted to keep stepping on them. But the silence had weight to it now. Before, silence in a marriage was just silence. The comfortable quiet that comes with knowing someone so well you don't need to fill the air. But now, silence was dangerous. It was everything we'd never said. Everything she'd hidden. Everything I was afraid to ask. In the afternoon, I went out to the garage. My workshop. My space. It was the only place in the house that didn't feel tainted. The only place that still felt like mine. I sat at the workbench, staring at half-finished projects, the birdhouse I was building with Emma, the busted chair Amanda had asked me to fix months ago. I couldn't bring myself to pick up a tool. My hands felt useless. That's when Amanda knocked on the door. She never came into the garage unless she needed something. It was an unspoken rule, my space, my escape. But there she was, standing in the doorway, her hands shoved into the pockets of her hoodie, looking like she was trying to hold herself together with both hands. "Can I sit?" she asked. I didn't say yes. But I didn't say no either. She took that as permission and perched on the stool by the door, far enough away that we weren't close, but close enough that the silence felt even heavier. "I made an appointment with a therapist," she said quietly. "For me. I know I have a lot to work through." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. It was the first real step she'd taken, the first sign she was serious about facing what she'd done, instead of burying it like before. "I want you to come with me," she added, her voice a little shaky. "Not right away. Just when you're ready." That word, ready, hung in the air between us. I wasn't ready for anything. Not forgiveness. Not therapy. Not even answers. All I knew was that the woman sitting in my garage, my wife, felt like a stranger. And I didn't know if I wanted to learn who she was all over again. But I didn't want to walk away either. "I'll think about it," I said, which was the best I could give her. She nodded, looking down at her hands. "That's all I'm asking." She didn't stay long. Just long enough to make it clear she wasn't giving up. And after she left, I sat there for a long time, listening to the quiet hum of the house, wondering if I was strong enough to do the same. The thing no one tells you about betrayal is that it doesn't hit you all at once. It comes in waves. 1 minute you think you're okay, and the next you're drowning. 1 minute you're remembering the good times, and the next you're questioning if any of it was real. That night, we ate dinner together, me, Amanda, and Emma. The three of us, at the same table where we'd celebrated birthdays and made Christmas cookies. To Emma, it was just another night. To Amanda and me, it was something much more fragile. A truce. A temporary ceasefire. After Emma went to bed, Amanda stood at the sink, washing dishes. I stood beside her, drying them. We didn't talk. We didn't touch. But we stood side by side, like we had for years, and for a moment, I let myself imagine that maybe, just maybe, we could build something new on top of the rubble. I didn't know if we would make it. I didn't know if I could forgive her, or if I even wanted to. But I knew I wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. They don't tell you this when you get married, but some of the hardest moments aren't the big fights or the dramatic ultimatums. It's the quiet stuff. The way you sit in the same room but avoid looking at each other too long. The way your fingers brush when you pass a dish, and both of you flinch like you've been burned. The silence in bed at night, both of you too afraid to turn toward the other, or away. That's where Amanda and I lived for the next few weeks. In the in-between, we weren't fighting. We weren't healing. We were just existing. I kept waiting for some moment of clarity, some sign that would tell me if we were done or if we were worth saving. But it never came. All I had were these little moments, too small to mean anything on their own, but together they felt like breadcrumbs leading somewhere I wasn't sure I wanted to go. Like the way she started keeping her phone face up on the counter, even when she left the room. She didn't say why. I didn't ask. But I knew. Or the way she stopped correcting me when I said I was going out for a drive, even if I was gone for hours. She used to text to see where I was, what time I'd be home. Now she just let me go. Like she knew I needed to feel like I could. And then there was therapy. I didn't go at first. Amanda did, twice a week. She never pushed me to come along, but she always left her appointment card on the fridge, where I couldn't miss it. I resented that card at first, like it was some invitation I hadn't asked for. But over time, it became this strange comfort, proof that at least one of us was trying to figure out what the hell had happened to our marriage. The first time I went, I didn't say much. The therapist, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a soft voice, asked me to talk about what I was feeling. All I could say was, I don't know. Because I didn't. It was too big, too tangled. Hurt, anger, love, betrayal, grief, they were all mashed together into this knot I couldn't untangle. But I kept going. Session by session, word by word, the knot started to loosen. Not unravel, not yet, but loosen just enough that I could breathe again. Amanda was different in therapy. More vulnerable. More open than I'd ever seen her, even in the good years. She didn't try to defend herself. She didn't make excuses. She just sat there, raw and terrified, willing to let me see her at her absolute lowest. And the crazy part was, I wanted to see it. Because for the first time in years, it felt like I was seeing the real Amanda. Not the wife, not the mom, not the woman who ran our schedules like a military operation, but the scared, flawed, desperate person underneath. And as much as I hated what she'd done, I couldn't ignore the fact that I still knew her. Even after all this. I still knew her. One night, after another silent dinner, I found myself looking at her across the table. She was clearing plates, her shoulders slumped like the weight of all of this was finally too much. And I said it. I miss you. She froze, plate in hand, like she wasn't sure she'd heard me right. I miss us, I said, quieter this time. I miss how easy it used to be. Her eyes filled up, but she didn't let the tears fall. Instead, she set the plate down and walked around the table. She didn't hug me, we weren't there yet, but she stood beside me, close enough that I could feel the warmth of her skin. I miss us too, she whispered. We stood there like that, side by side, for what felt like hours. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even a promise. It was just a flicker of something worth following, even if I didn't know where it would lead. If you'd asked me, back before all this, what would happen if Amanda ever cheated on me, I would have given you the standard tough guy answer. I'd be out the door. No second chances. That's the kind of thing you say when betrayal is a hypothetical, when it's something that happens to other people, not to you. Turns out, nothing's that simple when you're standing in the wreckage of your own life. In the weeks after Amanda's confession, I lived in that wreckage. Some days, it felt like we were rebuilding something. Other days, it felt like we were just sifting through the ashes, wondering if there was anything worth saving. There wasn't one big breakthrough. No dramatic movie moment where she broke down sobbing and I swept her into my arms and we promised to start fresh. It was quieter than that. Smaller. Like how she still made my coffee the way I liked it, not because she was trying to make up for anything, but because it was a habit, and habits were one of the few things we had left. Or the way I'd text her from the store to ask if we needed milk, because even though I was angry, we still shared a refrigerator and a life. Marriage, I realized, isn't a single vow. It's 1,000 tiny choices. Some you make together. Some you make alone. And some, the hardest ones, you make after everything you thought was solid has crumbled. The hardest choice I made was to stay. Not because I forgave her, I hadn't. Not because I trusted her again, I didn't. Not because I knew we could fix this, I wasn't sure we could. I stayed because I wasn't done yet. Because after all the anger, the heartbreak, The gut-wrenching realization that the person I loved most in the world had lied to me. After all of that, I still wanted to see if we could make something new from the mess. Staying wasn't weakness. It wasn't forgiveness. It was a choice. A gamble. A hope. The first time we held hands again, it was in the car, driving home from therapy. Neither of us planned it. I was talking about some stupid story from work, something so ordinary it felt almost obscene after everything we'd been through, and I felt her hand brush against mine on the center console. I didn't pull away. Neither did she. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't a symbol. It was just contact. Proof that we were still here, still real. Trust, I realized, isn't something you rebuild all at once. It's something you test, over and over, in 1,000 small moments. It's her telling me she's running late, and me choosing to believe her. It's me going out for a drive and her trusting that I'll come back. It's every quiet decision to let the past sit where it belongs, behind us, even when it wants to crawl back into the room. Some days I still hated her for what she did. Some nights, I lay awake, imagining her with him, and I wondered if I was a fool for staying. But then there were days, good days, where I saw glimpses of us. Not the old us. That version of us was gone. But a new us, raw and scarred and a little less sure of ourselves, but maybe, just maybe, stronger for it. I didn't forgive Amanda all at once. I forgave her in pieces, in the way she showed up to therapy even when it was hard, in the way she let me be angry without rushing to defend herself, in the way she let me grieve for the marriage we'd lost before asking if I was ready to build something new. Marriage, I learned, isn't about being unbreakable. It's about choosing each other, over and over, even after the breaking. I'm not here to say we lived happily ever after. I don't even know if that's possible. But I'm still here. And so is she. And some days that's enough. Some days it's even love.